up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another Monte poker vlog. Today's episode, we're going to be going over two sessions, one from July 5th and another one from July 13th. We did play various cash game sessions in between the last vlog and this one, so we'll go over the update on those as well at the end of the video. But unfortunately, there were places where we couldn't record, so I'll just have to give you the session update as opposed to the footage. This week's session is at Outlaws as per usual. The first one was on the shorter side, but on the second one, we got quite a few clips. It was an absolute roller coaster. We have plenty of cool hands to go over. That's all I have for you in today's intro. Let's jump right in. This session kicks off on a Friday right after work. We started playing at around 6 p.m. and didn't catch anything interesting until around 7. We looked down at our favorite punting hand, Ace Jack, this time of the suited variety. Under the gun opened for 15, so we go ahead and we put in the call for 15. One of the blinds came along, but he didn't have chips yet, so he doesn't actually have his money in the middle yet. Either way, $46 in the middle, going to this flop that comes down 3 Ace 10 rainbow. So we have top pair with a pretty good kicker. The pre-flop aggressor continues here for another $15 bet. We're gonna go ahead and put in the call here with top pair and a jack kicker. Don't see too much point in raising here. I don't think this particular opponent is going to call us with worse, so I'd rather just put in the call here. Hopefully he has a worse ace or possibly just a pair of tens here. Turn comes a 5 of clubs. Doesn't change too much on this board unless our opponent was on a wheel draw, which I don't think he would have been betting on the flop. Our opponent continues here for another $40. I'm not going to go anywhere for this price here. I don't think he has too strong of a hand if he's just going with a half pot size bet, considering there's now a flush and 2 different straight draws on the board. The river brings a 7 of spades, and it looks like our opponent is going to size up here. He goes for a $75 bet, and now I got to think this over a little bit. Given how the action went, would our opponent be playing an ace this way? Potentially. If our opponent had a strong ace, would he be playing it this way? Doesn't feel right to me. I feel like if he had an ace king or ace queen, he would have sized up a good amount on the turn, considering how wet the board was. And although this bet sizing on the river almost makes it look like our opponent wants a call, I don't see what he would want to call with unless he had ace 10. But considering our opponent opened under the gun and then fired on the flop, it could have just been a standard C bet, so he could have just had 2 Broadway cards or potentially suited connectors if he had 2 clubs. Our opponent could also be blasting off with a 10 here. So after thinking it over for a bit, I got a bit curious and wanted to see what our opponent had. I felt like there were more hands that I was beating as opposed to hands that I was losing to. Our opponent says you're good. I flip over our ace jack and he shows queen jack of clubs. Our opponent just took a stab at the flop with a gutter, turned a flush draw to go along with his straight draw, and then just bricked out on the river and had no choice but to bet in order to take down the pot. Always a good feeling to start off the session with a win. About 20 minutes go by before we look down at ace 5 of diamonds in middle position. I decide to open up the action to $15. It folds around over to the blinds, who both put in the call, so we're going to go 3 ways to this flop with $45 in the middle, and the board runs out 9 king 5 rainbow. Both of the blinds check it over to me. Since they don't seem interested in this pot, I'm going to go ahead and take a stab here. I decide to bet 20 into 45. It's far more likely that I have a king as opposed to either one of our opponents here. The small blind gets out of the way, but the big blind does not believe us and puts in the call. The 5 of clubs on the turn immediately rewards us with trips. Our opponent checks it over to us one more time, and I'm going to go ahead and put in a check back here. Typically, I like to bet these hands, especially when you get a very sneaky turn card. I don't think our opponent thinks that we bet the flop with a 5, so I highly doubt that he thinks this 5 helped us at all. But this gentleman is typically on the tighter side. Anytime he hits, he usually bets, even if he's donk betting into the pre-flop aggressor. For those reasons, I think it's better to check back here. If we bet, he might run away, but if we check, there's a chance he might take a stab at the river. And the river brings us a jack of diamonds. Doesn't change too much on this board here. Small blind thinks it over for a little bit, but eventually does decide to bet $18 here. This is a very small bet, so I can't imagine our opponent is incredibly strong here. Typically, I like to bet pot or a little bit over pot, trying to make it look like we're bluffing and going for max value. But as I mentioned before, this player is on the tighter side, so I know he's not going to call a $100 to $120 bet here. So I decide to keep our raise a bit on the smaller side. I go $60. It's only going to cost him an additional $40 here to make the call. Our opponent thinks it over for about 30 seconds or so, puts chips over the line. I grab my cards, flip them over, show that we do in fact have trips. Our opponent nods, and that's usually a good sign that we have the winning hand. But an even better sign is when the opponent returns his cards to the dealer face down, and we scoop this this pile of chips towards their new home. Over the next 40 minutes or so, nothing too interesting happens. We win 2 small pots, one with queen 10 of hearts, another one with 6-7 of hearts. Not sure why hearts are treating us so well today, but it is what it is. Then we get into the PLO Bomb Pot. We look down at 10-10-5-3 with 2 spades and 2 diamonds. Looks really pretty, but not that great of a starting hand. But when you flop top set with it, it is a phenomenal hand. To make things even better, there are some straight and flush draws available on this board. For those of you tuning in for the first time, on Dealer Change, they do PLO bomb pots, but they're capped at $100. So they are absolutely jam-packed with action. Everybody chases every single draw. So flopping top set when there isn't a completed flush or straight on the board is phenomenal. Anyhow, we bet $25 here, hoping that most of the table is going to call us, and that does seem to be the outcome, as we get called by 4 players and we head off to this turn 5 ways. 205 in the middle, and the turn comes a 7 of diamonds. Like I mentioned, these pots are capped here, so there's only $65 left to bet. Since we are on the turn, there's 200 in there. I'm gonna go ahead and just bet the maximum here for $65. Since the board is now paired, I don't expect a lot of people to be chasing their flush or straight draws, but if they do want to chase it, this is going to be the price. The action folds over to the middle position player, who eventually does put in the call. So we go heads up to this river card, which brings us an ace of clubs. So the clubs did get there, but our full house should still be good unless our opponent has pocket 7s or pocket aces here, to which I don't think he does when he grabs his cards and tosses them into the muck. So we take down this $330 pot.
All right, guys, coming at you guys from Outlaws. We didn't do the starting intro when we got here, so we're gonna do a little mid-session update, almost late session update, because I don't think I'm staying long. So on the way up here, nice backdrop as per usual. On the way up here, I was feeling a little tired because we stayed up for the 4th of July yesterday. We were editing Wednesday night, so I wasn't sure how long I was gonna stay. I wasn't sure how well I was gonna do. Got on the table. We're just catching cards. I'm playing well. You know, we're getting value where we need to get value and not over betting. We're not calling too much dumb stuff outside of that first hand that you guys saw. But I feel like I'm just catching hands. I don't feel like I'm doing anything special. So, you know, we're just kind of getting there on most of our draws, which helps a lot. Yeah, we're doing well. I'm thinking about getting up soon because I'm really tired. But we'll see if we keep running the way we're running. There's no reason to get up. So gonna get back in there, give you an update shortly.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we weren't able to pick up any more hands of interest before the end of this particular session, but don't go anywhere because we have more hands from the following session to show you guys. As I had mentioned earlier in the update, I was a bit tired. We were running hot and I wanted to stay longer just because, you know, you don't always run hot. So when you are running hot, you don't want to leave, you know? But I know myself, and I know I've been in this spot before where we make a bunch of money at the start of the session, and I don't want to leave even though I'm tired and feel myself kind of getting to the end of my run. I think it's better to just be disciplined here, take our profit that we have, and live to fight another day. So it is now July 15th, and we bought in for $200 here. We start with the PLO Bomb Pot, grab some chips, put it in the middle, grab some more chips, put it in the middle, and then all of a sudden we get a bunch of chips back. Poker's easy. After that, we look down at Queen Jack offsuit and scoop a small pot, Jack 10 suited, scoop another small pot. Then we look down at Ace 8 suited, but unfortunately we weren't able to take this one down. And now we can jump into some hands. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so the session started right around 5 o'clock. It is now 6:34, and we look down at Queen 8 suited. The $7 straddle is on by yours truly, so if nobody raises when the action completes, I'm gonna have final say here as to whether or not we should raise. The under the gun player called, High Jack called, small blind called, big blind called, and now when it gets back to me, I really feel like we should be raising this here because this hand isn't gonna play great multi-way, but I do decide to check this time around. $35 in the middle, and we go to this board run out, which comes 998 rainbow. Not a terrible board for our hand. We do have second pair, and since there's 2 9s out there, it's not very likely that our opponents have a 9. But then much to my surprise, under the gun decides to bet here for $15. The hijack ends up putting in the call, and I want to figure out right now whether or not our opponent has a 9, so I'm going to go ahead and raise to $60 here. Small blind and big blind both fold. Under the gun calls, the hijack gets out of the way, and now we're going heads up to the turn with $170 in the middle. The turn comes the Jack of Hearts, under the gun checks, and while I was planning on slowing down on most rivers, if our opponent did have a 9 here, would she check on this Jack of Hearts here Any 10 would now be open-ended, so I just wasn't 100% sure if she actually had the 9 or potentially had a hand like maybe Jack 10, which is open-ended on the turn, trying to play for the straight. So at this point, I've convinced myself that a double barrel is a good idea and that we're somehow going to get our opponent to fold here. I go for a $115 bet on this turn here, which is about 3/4 of the pot. Our opponent doesn't seem too thrilled about the bet sizing, but she doesn't look like she wants to fold either, so she puts the chips in the middle, bringing this pot up to $400 now. We go off to this river, praying for a 10, and the river brings us a black deuce. If there were ever a time to give up in this hand, it would definitely be now. And after our opponent checks it to us one more time, what do? The exact opposite. We put the rest of the chips in, 135 or so. Our opponent snaps us off with a 9, which we found out she had after our flop bet. This was just an absolute punt and completely unnecessary. But as much as I think I'm improving as a player, I still make some absolute blunders for inexplicably no reason. So unfortunately, we have to hop back up on that pony. We throw another $400 back on the table, and we got to restart our grind. If we were running really bad and getting sucked out on, I can understand a little bit more if we were tilted and made a stupid bonehead play like this trying to get unstuck. But as you guys clearly saw, we were hitting hands at the start of the session and we were doing perfectly fine. I have no idea what got into my water and what made me do this, but it is what it is. Moving on to the next one. $7 button straddle let us down last time, but there's no way it fails 2 times in a row. The action folds over to us, so it gets over to the small blind, who decides to raise to $15. The big blind calls, and we already have half of it in, so we're definitely going to put the call in when we look down at Jack 9 offsuit. I don't really want to call this, but when we're getting 5-1 on our money, there's no way we're going to fold. We go to this flop 3 ways with 45 in the middle. The board comes out Queen 9-8 with 2 spades. Small blind checks. Big blind decides to bet $15 with middle pair. I'm okay floating here for $15, especially when we have a gut shot to the straight. The small blind folds, and we go heads up to this turn, which comes a 5 of spades. The big blind checks it over to us, and then I decide to go for a check back here. Now, I think this is a mistake, considering we started this hand with 3 people. The pre-flop aggressor ended up checking the flop, and then the big blind decided to take the betting lead. It's far more likely that he has a queen here as opposed to a spade draw. So when the spade hit the turn, I think it's a much better card for me to bet as opposed to our opponent betting here. Not really a fan of how I played this turn card unless I was ready to give up on the hand, which we definitely were not. Can't do much about it now though, so we're off to the river, which brings us a jack of clubs, which improves our hand to 2 pair, but unfortunately puts 4 to the straight. To make things worse, our opponent bets $40. To make things even worse, I snap call the $40, instantly get shown the bad news. Not really sure why we called that. I was pretty sure we were beat to the straight, but you know, sometimes you just instinctively grab chips and throw them in the middle out of frustration without thinking. Just fold it next time, guys. All right, so things haven't been going too great in this session so far, a little bit because of the cards, but mostly because I'm a donkey. But that's okay, because in this hand we look down at pocket queens and we're about to change everything around. We look down at these beautiful ladies on the cutoff, decide to bump it up to $15. We end up getting called by 4 people, so we go 4 ways to this flop with $60 in the middle, and the board comes out King 10-4 with 2 diamonds. I don't like seeing that king, but when the action checks over to us, I think our hand actually might be best here, so I'm going to go with a half pot size bet of $30. 2 players fold, but when the action gets back over to the middle position player, it doesn't appear that he's going to go anywhere. He grabs the $30, puts him in the middle, so we go to this turn heads up, which brings us the 5 of diamonds. I would expect our opponent to bet if he had the flush, but he does check instead, so I think it's a lot more likely that he has the king as opposed to 2 diamonds. So I'm gonna go ahead and fire on this card here, see if we can get him to fold top pair. I decide to bet 55 into 120. It's a little under half the pot here. It doesn't seem like our opponent thinks about it for very long because he instantly starts cutting out chips and then puts them in the middle once again. So we go off to this river with 230 in the middle, which brings us ace of diamonds. We now have the second nuts on this board. Our opponent checks it over to us one more time. Once again, didn't put him on the flush on the turn. Don't think he has the flush now. No other move here but to go all in. Considering we started betting on the flop, this is going to look very full of it. I doubt our opponent is going to put us on a hand as strong as the queen high flush draw, and if he had the king high flush draw, he would have called us instantly. So I think our hand is good. My river all in is only for 150-ish or so. Our opponent seems to be in a tough spot and not happy about the situation or the run out, but does reluctantly put in the call. We show him the queen high flush and he shows us pocket fives for a turned set of fives, which are obviously no good anymore. Not sure what pocket fives were doing in there after we had bet the flop. We got super lucky on the turn, but then we sucked out on him on the river. Either way, happy to be scooping this $540 pot. About an hour and a half goes by before we look down at a playable hand. There's a $20 open by the player in middle position. Button ends up calling the $20. Small blind calls the $20, and when the action gets back to me, even though we technically have bad position for this hand, it's only $20 to make 80, so I'm definitely going to put in the call and at least see a flop here. Four of us going to this run out, and the board runs out deuce jack 9 with 2 diamonds. This board's pretty coordinated, but we do have a straight blocker along with top pair and absolutely no diamonds, so I definitely think a bet is in order. The action checks over to me and I decide to lead out here for $35. This should be big enough to get our opponent's air out of the way, and if our opponent is sitting on something like ace jack, I do expect him to re-raise here considering how wet this board is. Middle position player puts in the call, the button puts in the call. The action gets back over to the small blind, who takes some time to make a decision here but eventually does fold his hand. Three of us going to the turn with 185 in the middle, and the turn comes a 3 of spades. As I mentioned before, I kept the bet sizing small enough that if somebody had a jack with a pretty good kicker, I was expecting a raise, so I don't expect either of our opponents to have top pair here. I think it's far more likely that they have a straight or flush draw, so we're gonna size up big here. I'm gonna bet $130, trying to charge our opponents the max for a draw or just take the hand down here. The middle position player folds pretty quickly. The button doesn't seem to like the spot he's in, so he decides to return his cards to the dealer face down, and we take down yet another one. We look down at the best starting hand in poker 15 minutes after the previous hand. There wasn't any action before us, everybody just limped over to us, so we're definitely going to put in a bet here of $20. Considering how many limpers there were, I probably should have gone closer to $30 or $35 here. Otherwise, if one or two people call, the rest of the table is going to be priced in to call. Somehow the small blind finds the fold, but everybody else that already had money in the middle does decide to put in the call. Going 5 ways to this flop with 101 in the middle, the board runs out of 5-3 jack with 2 hearts. There's some straight and flush draws out on this board, so we're definitely gonna have to put in a good sized bet. And to my surprise, big blind decides to lead here for $20. This bet is far too small for us to just put in a call, so when it gets back to us, we're definitely gonna raise pretty big. And if any other players put in more money in between, that's just more reason to go bigger. The low jack ends up putting in the call for $20. The high jack gets out of the way. Cutoff decides that enough is enough. He's just gonna go for all of it here and decides to jam on us for a little under $100. And before we act, the person on the big blind starts sliding the chips in the middle. Obviously he wants to put in the call here. I do believe we're gonna have the best hand a lot of the times unless somebody flopped a set on us, so I'm gonna re-raise here for some protection. I go with a bet sizing of 225. If either of our opponents have draws, I don't want them to come along, and I want to isolate here with the cutoff. I have no idea what the cutoff has, but he obviously likes his hand. Really hoping he just has a top pair hand, maybe like 10 jack, queen jack, or king jack. Big blind folded immediately, but the low jack took a little bit of time to figure it out, but eventually does put in the fold as well, and that's when the cutoff flips over his hand, and he shows that he has jack 10 of hearts. Absolutely great flop for him. He flopped top pair with 2 hearts and immediately gets there on the turn on this, and as if it wasn't enough, we get needled by the river because it puts 4 hearts out there, and unfortunately we do not have the ace of hearts. I think we were super fortunate that our opponent was short stacked and we got everybody else out of the pot, because this could have gotten very ugly for us. Happy to be losing the minimum here. So this next hand is a little bit unorthodox, so I'll give you some history here. I looked down at jack 10 suited on the button earlier and faced a re-raise to about $50 after I had bet 20. Due to the strength of my hand and position, it was an auto call, but I knew the player to my left, one of the Outlaws dealers, Miss Susie, only does that with pretty big pairs or an absolutely great hand. Best case scenario, she was going to show us ace king suited, but I was expecting queens or better. Anyhow, the flop came out with 2 jacks, she had pocket kings, and she played an absolutely big pot against another player at the table. So I was super salty about folding my hand. So what happened the next time we had a hand and she raised us? We called, baby. And what did we call with? Absolute garbage. So at this point, when we call with 9 high and we figured our opponent has a big hand, like 2 face cards, or more realistically, a big pocket pair, we're gonna bet this board all day. And we're gonna use a good sizing. I went out for $40, which is about half the pot, really trying to find out whether or not she has a big pocket pair or if she just has 2 face cards. And based on the fact that she shot us a look and a smile, I would say that it's far more likely that she has a big pocket pair as opposed to 2 face cards. Susie does inevitably put in the call. She's not going to go anywhere on an 8 high board with a big pair. And then the turn comes a 7 of diamonds. Susie wants me to check this down, but there's absolutely no way I could possibly check this. All I have is a pair of 8s, and the only way I'm going to win this hand is if I bluff at this. And when I cut out $75 to bet here, Susie beats me into the pot, and at this point I know I'm absolutely screwed. Susie's a solid player, and I don't think I can do anything on this river besides jam to get her off of her hand, but even then she might sniff me out and put in the call anyway if she has a big pair like queens, kings, or aces. So at this point I've just decided that I'm going to wave the white flag on the river. That's when I remember that on my way in today I bought a one-way ticket to Suck Out City, and I'm about to cash it in on this hand. The dealer puts out the 5 of clubs on the river, giving us the straight. I feel like a total donk playing this garbage and going runner runner on Susie to pop her pocket pair. So I did decide to just check the turn and take down what was in the middle. And to be fair, I think if we would have just gone all in on this river with 4 to a straight out there and a ton of 2 pair combinations, I honestly think it would have been easy for Susie to get away here. We hit our next dealer, which means it's time for the PLO Bomb Pot. Once again, to the newer viewers, this is capped at $100 max bet per person. Anyhow, we look down at a decent starting hand, ace 10 8 5 with 3 hearts. I don't like having 3 hearts, rather just have 2, but it's not terrible. And then when the flop comes out king 9 7 with 2 hearts, we have the nut flush draw and an open-ended straight draw. So I think this is a pretty good board for us. We're in early position here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and bet the cap, which is $90, and try to get the max action from anybody else also on a draw. If we hit our flush or our straight here, we'll have the nuts with both hands. So I'm very comfortable getting the money in now with our combo draw. We end up getting 3 callers, ballooning this pot to $440. The turn is absolutely horrid. It is a board pairing 9 of spades. I'm expecting our opponents to be holding a set a lot of the time here. If by some miracle they just have king 7 and don't have pocket 7s or pocket kings, we'll somehow still be good here when the deuce of hearts hits the river. But our girl Susie got us back for earlier, calling her light when she raised with pocket kings, and she ended up hitting quads on the turn. Nice pot, Miss Susie. Long time no eat. Crazy part about this hand is we weren't completely dead on the turn. If we would have hit a 6 of hearts on the river, we would have made a straight flush. Now that would have been a sick hand. We go card dead for about an hour or so, but eventually we wake up with ace 9 suited in middle position. The under the gun player had put in a $6 bet, but that isn't enough. We're gonna bump up the price of poker a little bit. We decide to go with a bet sizing of $20 here. There's a couple people missing from the table currently, so I don't want to go too big and entice people to fold. The button decides to come along. Big blind decides to come along. The under the gun min better decides to put in the call for $20. There's now $81 in the middle, going to this flop 4 ways, which comes 8 queen 4 with 2 clubs. Absolutely wonderful flop for our hand here. I'm normally okay betting this hand, but into 4 people it's a bit tough, so I do decide to put in the check. The button decides to fire here for $30. The big blind calls, under the gun folds, and when the action gets back to me, I'm gonna go for the check raise here, try to represent a big hand. I go $100 here. Button puts in the call pretty quickly, and the big blind decides to get out of the way. Go to this turn heads up, which brings us the 5 of spades. Now, since we put in the check raise on the flop, we go for a juicy size bet here, but if I check it, I expect our opponent to check back a lot of the time after being check raised on the flop, so it bought us 2 cards instead of 1. He does put put in the check back immediately after we check the turn, and then we hit the 6 of clubs on the river. And at this point, I'm trying to eyeball my opponent's stack without making it too obvious. I probably should have known how much he had behind at the start of the hand, but it was really late at this point and I was getting kind of tired. So when I hit my hand, I tried to quickly just glance over to see what he had left, grabbed a stack of chips that I thought more or less was enough to cover him, put it in the middle. He didn't seem too happy about the situation, but didn't think it over for too long before putting in the call. He flipped over the nuts. Obviously it's good. And we take down this $750 pot. Shortly after that last hand, we ended up calling our buddy Fadi, a bit light because we were in position with King 10 offsuit. He opened for 15 under the gun and I was the only person that gave him action. He fired the flop and we called, he fired the turn and we called, and then he fired once again on the river and we ended up paying him off here. And what does he have? Ace Jack. So the hand is absolute garbage for me and we totally blast off and miss everything when we play it. When we play versus it and flop top pair on the flop, it totally kicks our ass on the river. I swear this hand is my kryptonite. Moving on to bigger and better things. For this next hand, we look down at ace 10 suited. We are on the hijack, and since nobody decided to raise behind us when the action gets back over to me, I am very okay with opening this hand here. Fortunately, we lost some more money between that last hand and this one, just trying to see flops and completely missing. We didn't really play a big pot for anything. So when I open this hand, I only open it to $10. I'm gonna play this and I'm gonna raise. I should definitely make it more than this, but that's totally fine. We go 4 ways to this flop with 41 in the middle, and the board runs out 9 deuce 7 rainbow. So we have an open-ended straight draw with no redraws to a flush. The action goes check check, and when it gets over to me, I think a bet is in order, but this pot is pretty small, so I go for another $10 bet, just trying to get everybody to call here and start building this pot in case we hit our straight. The button calls instantly, and then the big blind decides to put in a raise. He bumps up the price of poker to $35. The player behind me thinks it over for quite a bit, but eventually does put in the fold. The action gets back to me. I don't think raising makes much sense, but we're definitely going to put in the call here, and then the button calls pretty quickly behind us. We go to this turn 3 ways, and it comes the jack of diamonds, so we turn the nuts immediately. Big blind takes some time here and looks like he's contemplating putting in a bet, which is absolutely fantastic news to me, and goes with the bet sizing of $75. Now I could put in a raise here, but I don't want to scare off the player behind me. I'm not sure what hand he has right now, but since we have the nuts, I'm not really worried about anything, so I think calling makes more sense than raising. And the button thinks it over for quite a while. It looks like he's really debating whether or not he should call this hand, but much to my surprise, instead of calling, he decides to go for a raise and throws $200 out there. The button is my buddy Andrew, and I've played with him a number of different times. He's a pretty solid player, and I know he's not doing this light. Since we're holding the nuts, I highly doubt that he has just a single pair with a redraw to a straight if he's coming over the top here. Since we didn't hear from him on the flop, I really think he has a hand like pocket jacks here where he turned a set and improved enough to get everybody else off of the hand. If he would have had pocket 7s or pocket 9s on the flop, I think he would have put in a raise himself on the button as opposed to waiting for the big blind to put in the raise. So since I'm putting him on an extremely strong hand, now I'm heavily debating whether or not he's going to call a shove. He already put 200 in there. I only have about 525 in my stack, so even if he thinks he's beat, I don't know if he can fold top set for an extra $300. While I'm debating whether or not he's going to call our all in, we hear the magic words.
I'm all in. All in.
All in.
All in.
All in, all in, all in.
J9o Button. Call. 8. Pair the board.
Justin asked for a board pair, and unfortunately the queen of spades does not pair the board. Andrew and I both had the nuts, which now makes sense given the fact that 2 players went all in on top of his big raise and he snapped it off. Not as big of a scoop as it could have been considering we have to chop this pot, but I'd much rather chop it than lose to a full house on the river. The last hand of the night isn't too interesting, so I'll just let it play while we go over the session stats. As I mentioned in the start of the video, we have a couple sessions that we played that were outside of Outlaws, so we'll go over those real quickly. On July 4th, we played at Shoe Mash, a little under 5 hours, made about $200. Following day was the start of the session when we came on 7-5, July 5th, sorry. We only played for about 3 hours, but made about $600, which is pretty good. Then we played on July 7th for 2.5 hours, lost $80. It says that was on the 2-3, but that was actually on the 1-2 2 table while we were waiting for the 2-3 game. And then when we played 2-3, ended up losing 11-19, which was absolutely not good. And that was almost over a 7-hour session. And on July 8th, we went to Central Coast Casino, made $112. And then for this session on July 13th, we were in for 1,000, out for 1050, so $50 profit. Nothing impressive, but we were able to come back from that huge deficit and leave up a little bit. And we forgot to do the graph last week, but I remembered it this week. We're now at a total bankroll of 5,228, a little bit above where we were coming back from Vegas, but still overall stuck a good amount from the massive loss that we took last month. At this point, I feel like we accomplished what we came here to do, caught some cards, had some fun, had some laughs, and luckily we were able to leave with a little bit of profit this session. So with that, I'm going to have to sign off. Thank you guys for stopping by. If you made it this far into the video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all next week.